Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, I have for you true stories to listen to at work. So, put on your headphones, grab your flashlight, and let's step into the darkness together. This happened about 4 years ago. I live in a resort community and started working for a local real estate agent, taking photos of homes for sale. I usually photographed 3 to 4 homes a week, lakefronts and shacks alike. I had seen unusual things like the occasional hidden room or unique art collection left behind. But I had never encountered anything scary until this happened. It was a summer day, warm and bright. I knew the neighborhood I was heading to and no concerns about safety. The area was very suburban for the mountain with a large park and school nearby. I packed up my camera and drove 20 minutes to the home. Upon arrival, I began my session by taking pictures of the exterior. Nothing was out of the ordinary. After struggling to navigate the sharp slope the home was on, I managed to snap its lights and real deck. It was time now for interior shots. I proceeded to the front, entered the lockbox code, and tried to unlock the front door. As I fumbled with it, I felt overwhelmingly uncomfortable. Something washed over me in that moment, and I knew I shouldn't be there. I finally opened the door and found a house completely destroyed. The living room was a sea of debris. Light bulbs were smashed all over. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. I observed all of this without taking a single step further. I immediately closed the door, walked to my car as fast as I could, and called the agent. I told the agent that she would need to find someone else to take pictures of this house. She asked why, and as I tried to explain it to her, I realized I sounded like a crazy man. How can you professionally describe to someone the feeling of being scared shitless for no apparent reason other than a disgustingly filthy house? She told me she had seen homes that were less than welcoming. I left the property but decided I didn't want to lose my job over this. I called my father, who lived locally, and asked if he'd accompany me to the house. In all my days, I have never heard my dad discuss anything remotely spooky. He is a very no-nonsense kind of man and simply won't tolerate talk of ghosts or witches. Therefore, I thought he'd be perfect for this assignment. He'd keep my head in the game, for sure. I arranged to pick him up at his house in 30 minutes. My heart sank a little as I pulled up to my parents' house, and my dad's truck was gone. My mom came running out, purse in hand, to tell me that my father had to leave for work reasons, but that she'd go with me instead. She brought along a flashlight and assured me that it'd be just fine. As we drove to the house, I described to her what had happened. Her cheeriness level came down a few notches, and I could tell she was slightly unnerved. We parked in front of the house, and I knew she didn't want to go inside. I didn't want her to go either. She came up with a solution. She'd call my cell phone and talk to me as I walked through the house. She'd stand right outside of the front door. I answered her call, turned on my flashlight, and headed in. Again, immediately upon entering, I was scared. And just for clarification here, I am not easily scared. I am not one to see or feel things out of nature. Ever. So the fact that I was actually feeling something terrified me. By this time, it was later in the day and the house was positioned in such a way that it was completely shaded from the sun. The electricity was off and it was dark. Very dark. My mother was on the phone telling me to breathe. I can't hear you breathing. Are you that scared? Is it that bad? I had a hard time speaking as I took in all that I saw. The toilets were completely black on the inside. The kitchen had blackish reddish smears all over the counters. Children's toys were mixed in with porn magazines lying on the floor. I just kept clicking, trying not to focus on any more of the deeply disturbing things inside this house. I went as quickly as I could through the main level. I then came to a set of stairs leading down. I told my mother through the cell phone that I was heading down. She continued to reassure me and told me to hurry up and get it over with. I began walking extremely cautiously down the steps, one at a time. The steps led to a landing and then turned the corner, so all I could see was a white wall at the bottom. I had this immense feeling that I was going to say something horrific once I turned that corner. I was 2 or 3 steps away from the landing when I heard it. A scream coming from my phone. Not a mild scream, but a blood scream, like someone was being murdered on the other end of the line. My mom. I have never run as fast as I did running up those stairs. I completely expected to find my mom laying lifeless just outside the house. I go to the top of the stairs, and there she was, standing there, looking completely terrified and perplexed. I grabbed her hand and we ran to the car. We drove for nearby 5 minutes before one of us said anything. Then she turned to me and said, "Tell me why you were screaming." I told her that I thought it was her. Neither of us were screaming, but both of us, for a certainty, heard a woman screaming. We stopped at the grocery store parking lot and just sat there, trying to catch our breath. When I got home, I uploaded the pictures without actually looking at them and sent them to the real estate agent. I told her she'd have to do the editing on her own, as I would not have them on my computer. I then deleted the email and every single image. Because of that, I don't know the address of the house, nor have I driven by it since. I would have liked to research the history of the property. Alas, I'll never know what happened there. So, this might sound silly, but I think I'm being stalked, and it's happening at the stupidest place possible. At work. To give you a bit of background info, I worked at a company which produces parts for large metal constructions. I'll leave it vague like that, since if I say anything more about it, I could get into trouble. Anyways, I'm their IT guy, well, IT girl. But that's not important. What is important is that I spent my working hours alone in an office, which used to be the server room, and since the company doesn't care about their IT department as long as everything works, I share the office with 3 servers, which keep buzzing away by my ear every single day. I've been here for 3 years and by now, they are pretty much background noise, easily ignored. My day passed by pretty standard. Spent my time browsing the web and answering the most ridiculous of calls, like, "My screen went to black all of a sudden. What do I do?" "Move your mouse, madam, or press any key on your keyboard." It's a mind-numbing job for most of the time, but it pays the bills. So, I was biding my time here until something better pops out. Things were pretty normal up until about 2 months ago. Before I go further, it's important to mention that unless I am physically present, my office is locked. I locked it even when I go to the bathroom, and the only one who has a key to it is the fire department guy, who is an elderly guy only standing here overnight and spends his time watching late TV shows and sipping beer. I've ruled him out right away, since he's actually a nice guy, but isn't crazy to go all the way up to the 3rd floor of my building unless he absolutely has to. As I was saying, strange things started happening. They're all minor stuff, but when you pile them up, they do become quite annoying, especially since they are now happening almost every other day. It started with stupid things, like me not be able to find the air conditioning remote control, which I always keep on the same spot on my desk. It was just gone one morning, and I found it later in an old file cabinet, which I haven't opened for at least half a year. Then I have the scene set up under my PC screen. A blue fox and a brown dog touching noses, with 3 red roses scattered around their feet, all made out of paper. Said exactly like that, it means something to me, and I only disturb that scene when I'm cleaning the dust of the desk and screen. But even then, I put it back right as it was and don't touch it anymore. One morning, I came to find the scene disturbed. The brown dog appeared to be flicked off the desk, as it was now lying on the floor to the side, while the blue fox was said to sort of tremble over the roses, I suppose. At first, I comfort myself that it may have been a draft that disturbed it, but that would only knock them over, not get the fox's foot stuck in one of the roses. Then, other things started happening. My screen is always tilted in a certain direction to stop the light hitting it, so I am actually able to see what I'm doing. Now, almost every morning, and sometimes even during working hours, when I leave the office for a longer time of period, I have to tilt the screen back into its previous position. I keep losing post-it papers, and I can't leave my coffee in a cup when I leave, because by the time I get back, I find what's left of it spilled into my trash bin. Luckily, the trash bin is solid plastic, so none of it ever gets on the carpeting, but the cleaning lady has started looking at me weird, as every now and then I go by the bathroom to rinse the bin. Every now and then I'd find a post-it note pinned on my empty coffee mug, saying things like "stop" and "it's bad for you." I've complained about this to my colleagues, but I only got chuckles of them, and teasing me that I must have a Richmond infestation. For those who don't know, Richmond is a character from the IT Crowd, a British comedy TV series, who is a creepy goth living in the server room, and everyone has forgotten about him. I laughed it off, of course, but to be honest, I was a bit creeped out. Up until now, I had tried to chalk all those incidents out to me going crazy from the buzzing of the servers and noticing silly stuff and then overthinking them. But 3 days ago, I got a late-night call from the night guard asking me what I was still doing at the office since it was close to 11 p.m. I informed him that I am at home, about to go to bed, but he didn't believe me as he said that he can see the light is turned on and he just saw someone walk by the window. Now, this got chills going down my spine. I never leave the lights on when I leave. Never. I always double check when I'm locking the door and take a look from the outside before I get into my car. I told this to the guard, and a moment later the call dropped. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. I went to work the next day and got halted by the same guard who was just overseeing the beginning of the shift and was about to head home. He informed me that as soon as I told him that it wasn't me walking around in there, he sprinted to the fireman grandpa and made him come with as he went by to my building to check what was going on. Of course, by the time they got there, the lights was off and there was no one in the office. I was almost ready to turn on my heel and head back home, as I was getting the heebie-jeebies from this whole thing. But the guard assured me that he'd leave a note for the guy taking over his shift and gave me the direct number to their phone, so I could call if anything happened, and he'd be up in a few minutes. I agreed. That was until I looked outside my window. I'll admit, the window hasn't been clean in a while, since the cleaning lady sort of likes to ignore my office. Too many wires and sensitive equipment, Mom. I'd get fired if I broke anything, was the excuse. So I did most of the cleaning myself, but somehow didn't get to the windows in a while. So there it was, in the thin layer of dust. A large smile face was drawn, staring at me with its poked-out eyes. I just kind of stared at it for a while, until I got the courage to get up, find a dust rag, and clean my window. I've reported it to the guard, who was not as worried about it as the last night shift, saying that someone is playing a prank on me. I have a hard time believing it. Who would do that? The fireman grandpa? He has a tough time to get up and go to the bathroom, let alone drag himself to the 3rd floor or another building. The night guard? He's the one who warned me about it and doesn't have the key to my office. One of my colleagues? I doubt anyone would be crazy enough to get up in the middle of the night for 2 months straight, steal the key from the fireman grandpa, and sneak in just to play pranks. And how the hell would they be able to do that during the day while I'm gone? I've tried asking for a security camera to be installed into my office, but the boss refused it, saying that will cost him too much and there was no need for it, since nothing was broken or stolen. I don't have that kind of money either. While I was trying to work out an alternative solution to this problem, I remembered that since this is an old server room, the floors are actually hollow. This was built back in the day when servers took up the whole room and needed extra space for wiring. Technically, there's enough space under my floor for an adult person to crawl on. And now I'm actually and officially creeped out. I want out of there. I want whoever is doing this to stop dumping my coffee into my trash bin. I want them to stop messing up my origami scene. I want them to stop tilting my screen, hide my post-its and remote controls. And I want none of those creepy smile faces on my windows. One more incident like this and I'm calling quits of my job. I don't care how difficult it's going to get without a steady income of money. And you, Richmond, screw you. Before I leave, I'm pouring a pot of coffee under your floorboards. About a year ago, I graduated from college with a bachelor's in arts and science, a debt roughly equal to the combined worth of all my internal organs, and no job. I'd already dropped any and all luxuries like cell phones or more than 1 meal a day, when the employment gods finally decided to smile on me. Being desperate and more than a little strapped for cash, I took the first bone thrown my way, which in this case meant an overworking, underpaid lab tech position at a biology lab about 2 blocks west of the middle of nowhere. I'd get in every day before the sunrise and slog my way out each night long after the sun had set. But ultimately, it wasn't the long working hours that had my goat. It was the commute. I'd already sold off my beloved car a few months earlier, and with the local bus system being generally apathetic towards areas with a population below that of a large city, I was resigned to walk the mile or so between my workplace and the nearest bus stop. There were hardly even any cars that took the road during the rush hours, so I tended to have the whole road to my lonesome. I soon found myself bored with my morning and evening's shuffling commute, but seeing as how there was only one road between my A and B, I was stumbled as to how to improve upon my tedious little trek. Then, a few months ago after work, I noticed that I was no longer the only person traveling around my little stretch of asphalt. I had turned on my heel to watch a bird silhouetting against the moon when I noticed a black shape at the footbridge at the start of the road, and then I saw him again the next day. I couldn't help but laugh. This poor guy was in the same sorry boat as I was, at least at night, and as I turned back to face my destination, I remembered whispering, "Well then, Starshine, let's you and I have some fun." From then on, I imagined we were playing a very slow game of tag with one another. My game, my rules, after all, and the rules were simple. The game began at the footbridge and ended at the junction of roads near the bus stop. Running was not allowed, and during the length of the road, there was no looking back. I played this game before with one of my coworkers during undergrad, since we both lived in and commute to the same areas, and I thought that, forced or not, the feeling of being chased would liven up my walk a bit. I'd always look for him at the start and finish of each round, and at first it was rare for him to be anything other than a blip against the darkness at first. But as the weeks went on, I noticed that he was getting closer. Since my pace had not changed from my usual slow toddle, and since I arrived at the start of road at roughly the same time every day, he must have either been moving faster or starting sooner. I brushed this off initially, since there was no way he could have known about the game. But being off science mind and body, I decided that a test was in order. The next evening, I made an excuse to my boss that I had to leave early for some reason, and I waited at the start of the road for starshine. An hour later, and I was still the only soul of the road, and eventually I had to start walking. I'd like to say that I was perceptive enough to feel a presence or realize I was being watched, but it was late, and I am not exactly the brightest crayon in the box. So, when I turned around to see Mr. Starshine standing in the road less than a half-mile away, I about to had a heart attack. I had no idea when he had joined me on the road, or how I had failed to notice him gaining on me. More concerning, though, was the fact that, having seen me pass beyond the finish line over a playing field, he had just stopped. I had always assumed that, like me, Starshine was another unfortunate commuter. So what was he doing standing on the road when he was presumably on his way to wherever he was coming from? For that matter, where did he work? My lab and a small widget factory were the only buildings in the area, and I knew everyone that worked at both, and I was certain I'd never seen Starshine among my coworkers or neighbors. There were no houses nearby. I was the only person at the bus stop, and the nearest stop after mine was over 8 miles away. So, where was Starshine coming from? Or, for that matter, going to? It didn't make any sense. So I knew I had to try it again. What can I say? Brightest crayon in the box. That night, I left even later than usual, leaving myself barely enough time to catch the last bus, but right as I was about to step over the bridge, right about the start of the game, I froze, and I am not ashamed to admit just how terrified I had suddenly become. Despite my addiction's bravado, I am not a large or particularly formidable person. Now, I didn't want the game to start because I knew that this time he'd most likely catch me, and had never considered what was going to happen if he did. But I had to get home somehow, and with my coworkers gone for the evening and the lab locked, I didn't have very many options. I crossed the footbridge and started walking. The rules were simple. The game begins at the footbridge and ends at the turn that marks the junction at the end of the road. No running, no looking back. No running, no looking back. No running, no looking back. A few minutes later, I heard the footbridge planks groan as I was joined on the road. No running, no looking back. I began to walk faster. No running, no looking back. I could hear him gaining on me. I sped up even further, and behind me, so did he. No running. I looked back. There, only a few feet away, and closing fast, was Starshine. I'd like to tell you what he looked like, but honestly, I don't remember. All I remember is catching a glimpse of a hand rising up to grasp my shoulder, and I bolted. Behind me, Starshine screamed and started after me, but I had a lead now, and I was running harder than I'd ever run in my life. The junction was close, so close, but Starshine hadn't lost much ground, and I could hear him gaining on me again. In desperation, I threw off my jacket and heard it collide with something behind me, and then Starshine screamed again, but it didn't matter. Those few steps were all I needed, and a second later, I threw myself ass over hat into the road junction. As I got up, I could hear Starshine screaming at me from the end of the road. You fucking cheater. You fucking cheater. You filthy fucking cheater. As soon as I had my feet under me, I took off again, towards the next bus stop, glancing behind me every few feet to make sure I wasn't being followed. But, for whatever reason, Starshine didn't follow me. Unsurprisingly, I missed the last bus and spent the next few hours walking to a nearby city for help. The next morning, flanked by 2 bored and disbelieving policemen, I returned to the road junction. There, pinned to a tree with a hunting knife, were the remains of my jacket. God damn it! I've never been so happy to be a filthy fucking cheater in my life. The cops started taking me a little more seriously. For the next few weeks, I got cabs and hitched ride with whoever would take me. On night, when I could not get a ride, I slept in the cab. A few days ago, the cops told me they finally found a man they believed to be Starshine a few miles outside a larger city down south. He had been arrested for stalking an elementary school teacher who, unlike me, had the sense to call the cops when she first began to notice her unwanted shadow. I've been asked to go and testify at his trial, but I can honestly say that I'd been just as happy to wash my hand off all of this and try to move on with my life. After all, I did cheat. I used to work at a tiny real estate office in Canada. It used to be a townhouse with 2 floors and a semi-finished basement, which the owners converted into an office space. I never had anything strange happen to me in this office, but I have heard stories of women walking down into the basement and finding some homeless guy sleeping or something. Nothing paranormal or totally horrific, but spooky nonetheless. Exactly a month ago, I had to stay at work late, finish an offer on a home. It was dark outside, but I wasn't too worried since my mom was coming to pick me up at 10 p.m. I finished the offer and started getting ready to leave. Suddenly, the front door swung open and my mom ran past me at the receptionist's desk and upstairs, telling me I'll be done soon. I figured she just had to use the washroom, so I ignored it and waited patiently. I kept hearing her footsteps walking about upstairs, so I turned off all the lights on the main floor and told her to do the same on the top floor. As I'm waiting by the door, I hear a knock. When I open it, I see my mom standing there, waiting by the door. She says to me, "Sorry I'm a little late. Let's get going." I froze in fear. How could she be at the door if she just went upstairs a few moments ago? I quickly turned on all the lights and crept up the stairs with my mom. If we blocked the stairs, that intruder wouldn't be able to escape. Then it dawned on me, how did that person know my name? And why was she or he posing as my mother? When we reached the top of the stairs, my mom checked the bathrooms and I checked all the desks and office spaces. No one was there, not a sign of anyone anywhere. My mom said I must have been so tired that I imagined it. But I know what I saw. We turned off the lights and left. The next morning, I got a call from my manager. She told me she would contact the police and told me not to panic as I was coming into work the same night. She asked if I saw anything weird last night, and I told her what I saw. She promised me that she would stay with me during my night shift for a couple days, and she'd keep police on speed dial. When I asked her why, she replied, "Police found a man in the basement. He was wearing a wig and a female trench coat. He must have hid in the basement by crawling through the windows. He was probably waiting for you, because in his purse he carried a knife, a rope, and numerous photos of you from the office. Natalia, this man has been stalking you for months, and you had no idea." Needless to say, I quit work the same day. I work as a pizza delivery man. I haven't dealt with anything too excessive, maybe a few rude customers here and there, but overall, most of my experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. This is until last night. I had gotten a late night delivery to some house out in the middle of the woods. There was a neighborhood there that I was very familiar with, but all the houses were so far apart and separated by so many trees that any single house could easily pass as its own cabin in the woods type story. I had grown accustomed to travel through back roads in the end of night though, so that didn't faze me. I simply put the address into my GPS and left. It was an unusually dark night, and I couldn't see any addresses on any of the houses, so I had to rely on my GPS to tell me when I got to the house, and I even ended up passing it a few times and having to turn around. The GPS was acting up, and the only reason I could tell it was a house was a man standing at the end of the long wooded driveway, flagging me down. Customers will do that from time to time, if they have an address that's hard to read or no address marking at all, so it was a nice sentiment. I pulled up, and the man smiled at me and walked back to the house as I followed behind him. He then entered, shutting the door behind him, which confused me, but he easily could have just been getting his wallet. While I waited outside, I began to examine the house. It's old. Overall, I felt bad for the old man. His house looked abandoned. I sat and waited, and he never came out. I decided to knock to remind him of my presence, and as soon as I did, a banging began on another door to the left. This, of course, startled me, but I easily shook it off as a dog, as things like this happen all the time. But it wasn't barking, just banging on the door. I stood alone in the dark, a little freaked out, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I knocked a few more times, but every time the banging on the door got more and more intense. Finally, it went silent. I heard the doorknob turn. Not the front door knob, the door to the left that the dog was banging on. It wasn't a smooth motion either. It sounded like someone playing with the doorknob until it finally clicked. Could the dog have accidentally hit it? The door creaked open, and I was met with a face coming out from the side of the door. It was a dog's face? I couldn't tell. It was dark, and all I could make out was a stark, without face, with large, dark, beady eyes, and a small black dot at the center. I assumed was a snout. However, it couldn't have been a dog. From where the head was peeking out, it must have been at least 5, and it was perfectly sideways, as if some person was simply peeking out the door, trying to conceal the rest of their body. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper tell me I'm sorry about that. Wait, your money's right inside here. I'll take the food. It was dark, and I could barely see, and I've never had a bad experience, so, as freaked out as I was, I chalked it up to me being unable to properly see this man's face and began approaching him. That's when I noticed the door had a number on it, 4121. I quickly checked the receipt to see it says 4221. Finally, an excuse to get out of here without seeming rude. I politely tell the thing, that I just checked and I have the wrong address, and walk back to my car, refusing to look back. Once I get in my car, I glance over to the door to see the man standing outside the door staring me down. Same disturbing dog-like face as before, but now that he's standing, I can see his very tall figure and very much human shape. I calmly backed out and left to the actual house I was meant to go to and apologize for its late delivery. I explained to them the error I made and then relayed to them how confused I was that guy seemed to also have ordered a pizza. They laughed about it and I got pretty nice tip. I then told my manager the story and he looked at me confused. There was no delivery to 4121 and we're the only pizza place that delivers in miles. Hell, we're the only restaurant that delivers in miles. So why this man or thing so ready to accept me into his home? Why was some sort of man standing at the end of the driveway ready to wave me down and invite me? The summer after my high school graduation, I worked a brief minimum wage stint at the zoo 75 minutes away. Let me be clear, I did not work with the animals. I stood outside the dolphin show and collected people's tickets, cementing my decision that I would never work at a large business again. I quit in August and went off to Missouri to college. That lasted for about a semester, and I decided that school was not my thing either. So I went back home and job searched for around a month until I landed a position at a family-owned pet store. The pay wasn't great, only 25 cents over my last wage, but it was a start, and I had saved up enough from the previous summer to nestle myself into a cheap economy apartment about a mile away from work. I felt like I finally found a good environment for myself. Most of our customers were loyal and had been shopping there for years. They and their dogs were always happy to see me, but they always seemed happiest to see my coworker, Charlotte. Charlotte had been working in the store for 12 years. She wasn't related by blood to the owner, but she was basically a part of their family. They paid for her condo, her car, her health insurance, the works. She knew all of our customers by name and was very popular with them. Charlotte was the one who conducted my interview and gave me the job as well as all of my training. So I looked up to and respected her. She was kind and caring. She was also a bit of a party girl. At her age, I had expected her to be a lot more mature and mellow than she was. She drank and partied and smoked nearby every night and would constantly come into work hungover. Despite all this, she did her job well and managed to keep up with all her responsibilities within the store. Even though she was a decade older than me, we got along well and became friends. 4 months later, I had proved myself to be a trustworthy and hard-working member of the team. I was no longer the newbie, and things were going great. I finally felt like an adult. I was closer than ever to Charlie, and whenever the store was empty, we would secretly bitch about rude customers and the shit the owner said and did. I was catty and two-faced, but it was fun. She was talking to me about her younger boyfriend who she was madly in love with. He's the only man, she would say, with a laugh. She was in love with this guy. She talked about him all the time. It was annoying, but I was happy for her because she hadn't exactly been one to make relationship with guys. One night stands and maybe 1 or 2 weeks long. Then one day, Charlie came in with a black eye. I didn't think anything of it at the time. She told me that her friend had elbowed her in the face when they were drunk, and that seemed very her, so I just laughed. 2 days after that, she came in with a big cut across her nose. Accidentally closed my face in the car door, she said with a laugh. I laughed with her. It was wrong, I know now. But she brushed it off so casually I wasn't worried. But when she came in a week later with her arm in a sling, I grew suspicious. I fell down the stairs when I was drunk, she told me. I grinned and said, "Geez, Charlie, you look like an abuse victim." She gave a weak giggle and looked away. Something was wrong. She still talked about Ryan on a regular basis. She was so in love with him that she couldn't see that he was hurting her. So when she came the next day with swollen eyelids from crying and a big bruise on her forearm, I confronted her. "Charlie, I know you love this guy, but I don't think this relationship is healthy," I began. I saw a filter of fear across her face before she regained her composure, insisting that everything was fine, and she didn't know what I was talking about. As I tried to continue, a customer walked in and she slid past me to greet him. She avoided me for the rest of the day. I let it go. I was friends with her at work, but I wasn't about to argue with her about her love life. I regret that I didn't tell my boss about it. She was their family after all, but I was afraid. I had never dealt with this kind of thing before. The following Sunday, she didn't show up to work. Charlotte had worked every Sunday for the past 7 years. If she was going to be even 5 minutes late, she always gave me a call or a text. Nothing today. I texted her 10 minutes before opening, hoping that maybe she had partied too hard the night before and that she was passed out. She didn't answer. I called her 1, 2, 3 times before she finally picked up. Her voice sounded far away. I heard feedback. She was driving. "I can't make it today," she said, clearly distressed. "I hit a deer with my car and I'm on my way to a mechanic." That was the last I heard from her. As it turns out, my suspicions were wrong. The police found the body in her condo about a week later. A 19-year-old boy named Ryan and the son of one of our customers. His body was emaciated and showed clear signs of having struggled. The bruises around his wrists and ankles were evidence enough of that. He had been strapped down to a bed, starved, and beaten for at least a month. He escaped, but he was hit by a car and dragged unconscious. Back to that condo. He died of his subsequent internal bleeding. They found her car 2 months later on a dirt-side road, nearly 200 miles away. The hood was dented and covered in dried blood, and the window was smashed out. Charlotte was nowhere to be found. I'm not worried about Charlotte coming to find me anymore. If she's not already being arrested, then she's probably dead. She's not some monster under my bed. I still cry about Ryan. I cry about the shop closing. There's nothing I could have done to prevent this. I know. She was my coworker, not my best friend. But finding out how little I knew, realizing how I just accepted her presence in my life as some sort of role model for months without actually knowing anything about her, frightens me. I didn't know a fucking thing, and I was okay with that. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. First of all, I am so excited to announce that I have new merch on my shop. It's a sticker set of 5 different designs. Every set comes with a small exclusive signed print. You can find the link for my shop on the description. Take care, and I will see you all in my next video.